is also Robin Barrows. She is our program supervisor for the CPRG program. We will be taking you through a pretty comprehensive review of the document. We will include some history about the CPRG grant itself, the timeline for this project and where we are in that timeline. Of course, what we did to develop the CCAP and how it is actually been put together. We'll look at what we did in terms of public engagement and outreach. We'll also look at workforce development input. We will also give you some of the preliminary results and the data that we have collected so far, and we'll give you an idea of what next steps will be happening after this presentation today and during our public comment period through the 6th of October. So just to kind of give you an idea and an overview of the Climate Pollution Reduction Grant Program, it was part of the Federal Inflation Reduction Act. That legislation on the federal level provided states, local governments, and territories and tribes with funds and money to go ahead and develop and implement climate action plans and to look at ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and other harmful air pollutants in the state of North Carolina. So in 2023, North Carolina at the state level received $3 million from this federal legislation to go ahead and produce our own climate action plans. And in addition to the $3 million at the state level, two metropolitan statistical areas also received $1 million. That is Central Lina and Central Pines. That's in the Charlotte area and in the Triangle area as well. So as part of this effort, we have not done this alone. We have really done an enormous job with a lot of great collaborative partnerships along the way. Those efforts include the Department of Transportation, the Department of Commerce, the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources, and DEQ serves as the lead for implementing this grant and for coordinating and collaborating across these departments. We also had heavy participation from both of our MSAs, and we look at their input in our document to be there. Although we made great efforts to try to include their input and their information without duplicating any counts. There are 3 phases to our project. We are now in phase 3. Those phases are pretty much around deliverables within the grant. The first phase was actually producing the priority climate action plan. The second phase was actually producing the implementation plan that resulted from that priority climate action plan. And now our last phase is actually producing the comprehensive climate action plan, which attempts to look at everything that we developed in the previous 2 documents and then look at things from a total economy-wide perspective in the state of North Carolina. Here is our timeline. As you can tell, we are currently in the dark blue section. We are in our public comment phase of the project. That phase is preceded by 3 phases: our initiation and planning phase, which started late last year, our stakeholder engagement plan, which started the beginning of this year, and then most of the time this year has been actually dedicated to drafting and developing the plan and then working with our stakeholders to engage them and get their feedback. And now we're looking to you to have public comment and public feedback within the document. We hope to wrap this document up and get it submitted to the EPA on the 26th of November. The technical due date is actually the 1st of December, but with the Thanksgiving holidays butting up against that deadline, we're trying to get a little bit ahead and turn it in before the Thanksgiving holiday. Now, this kind of lets you know a little bit about what the climate action plan should include and what we should be doing with that climate action plan. So the CCAP basically builds upon the priority climate action plan and the implementation plan. It is designed as a standalone document. So although it has roots within those 2 previous documents, you will see that it takes that information and expands upon it greatly. So we have done our best to incorporate the near and long-term goals that were founded in state government and in federal legislation, as well as in the priority climate action plan. It is a narrative document that attempts to report how we will provide an overview of our greenhouse gas sources, our sinks, the sectors that produce those and offset those, and how we are actually working with those sectors to make sure that we are meeting our targets as best we can. It also includes a section on benefits for communities who are experiencing high energy burdens, and those communities who are also in rural areas, have low income or limited resources in meeting their energy needs. Why are the PCAP and the CCAP documents so important? These are planning documents. First of all, since we received money from the EPA, we are required to produce those documents. So that's one reason why they are important. But bigger and badder reasons for why they are more important are that these plans have and outline opportunities for future funding and for further funding across the state of North Carolina, and funding efforts that can produce or support more green and clean energy, better infrastructure, and tying more workforce development to the improvements in our energy sectors. There are also roadmaps for action. The CCAP actually expands into long-term strategies across all of our sectors in North Carolina to show what we can do to not only reach our greenhouse gas reduction targets, but also to look at where there are areas for investment for future funding, like we said previously. It also highlights economic and workforce benefits. By planning where and how we are going to be promoting clean energy growth, we have an opportunity to align training programs that can often benefit people within the state of North Carolina and provide economic opportunities. And we also look at trying to provide ways where those economic opportunities can actually impact rural, low-income, and energy-burdened communities across the state. And another consequential benefit of actually having planning documents and the awareness of climate impacts across the state, we see that other local jurisdictions are also looking at their own targets and how they are going to reduce their own targets. And on the slide here, you see a number of municipalities and local governments that are actually putting forth their own climate action plan or building climate action activities within their own strategic plans to meet goals within their specific areas. This is an outline of the development actions that we took to actually get the CCAP complete. You can see there's pretty much 10 phases to our project. The big takeaway from this slide is that we looked at our greenhouse gas inventory that was produced by the Department of Air Quality. We based a lot of our targets and a lot of our emissions calculations from that report. That was done in January of 2024. From that, we developed our business as usual scenario, and you'll see that reflected quite prolifically within the document. We showed how we set our targets using Executive Order 80 and the EPA. And then we went through and identified and looked for measures and specific things that we could promote within the plan that actually help us meet our targets. Then we created and hope to create the plan for final submission to the EPA by December 1st. And then from that standpoint, once the plan is submitted, we are required for the next year and a half to produce some sort of ongoing progress report that actually monitors how well we are doing. This slide actually takes a look at our greenhouse gas emissions from that greenhouse gas inventory that was published in January of 2024. This shows you all the sectors in the North Carolina economy that produce greenhouse gas emissions that we are measuring. You'll notice the dotted line on the far right-hand side of the screen. Everything to the left of the dotted line is an economic sector that produces greenhouse gas emissions. So everything from transportation to buildings and homes to electricity generation, everything, or the one thing to the right of that line, is our natural and working lands. These are natural environments that actually offset our carbon emissions by producing or creating sinks that actually absorb that emission. And they are a very important part of our calculation, as you can see, because they can offset almost 50% of the greenhouse gas emissions that we are producing across the state in other sectors. When we are looking at our CCAP and our CCAP measures, we went through a pretty specific process to define those measures. The measures have to be feasible, implementable, and quantifiable or measurable in some sort. So in order to meet that standard, we had to go through a bit of a process, and we wanted to make sure that we were complete with that process by looking at existing projects that were already out there. We also took a really hard look at the inventory and to see how that inventory could be used as our business as usual projections. We also looked at data collection and community input. We updated our measures with all of that information to make sure that we are actually looking at things that are relevant and measurable and feasible. We refined our measures, and then we finalized those measures, and you'll see those measures in the Comprehensive Climate Action Plan. We also went across the state to look at community feedback and for meaningful engagement for the plan. We did a number of virtual sessions. We also did 5 in-person sessions across the state. We had 141 people participate in these engagement sessions that represent 48 organizations. We had 110 people respond to an individual survey. We put out a survey on our website that actually looked at what individuals were doing to offset greenhouse gas emissions in their own private and personal lives, what ideas and opportunities they are adopting alongside the things that we are looking from a bigger project perspective. And it was awesome to see 110 people and how they choose to change their behavior and do things in a more comprehensive climate promoting way. We also have had 1,340 unique visitors to our CPRG website to monitor what we're doing and how we're doing it. One of the awesome things about reaching across the state and looking at different communities and inviting them to participate is we also discovered a number of community-based organizations that are working to promote climate change, to promote greenhouse gas reduction. And here are 3 of the ones that we've decided to highlight in our CCAP. They are by no means the only ones, but they are the ones that we engaged with the most and that we discovered along the way from our process. And so those are represented here on the screen. Feel free to check them out. They're awesome, and we wanted to make sure that we shared them with you. This next slide has some bright and shiny faces and kind of gives you an idea about how we got to know the organizations that are represented here and some of the folks that are there. The last part of the document itself also looks at workforce analysis across the state of North Carolina. We partnered with the Department of Commerce to help provide this analysis, and it's pretty much broken up into 2 pieces. The first piece is energy job growth in North Carolina. It shows that if we continue to look at a robust climate sector within North Carolina, that we have a pretty great potential of creating a number of new jobs. And so there looks at 9,650 new jobs per year could be created across the 4 sectors that are listed here in their report. Together, those sectors and those jobs could drive a $49 billion economic impact by 2050 across the state of North Carolina. And that at the moment, the most jobs in demand within these areas are folks who can do construction installation, electricians, HVAC technicians, solar installers, and energy auditors. And that at the moment, we have more opportunity for jobs and for people than we currently have the people to fill them. So we're looking at a gap of around 8,300 workers in the installation, maintenance, and repair roles. So noting that we do have a gap, the second piece of our workforce analysis is what are we doing to prepare our workforce to meet that gap? And the Department of Commerce has a number of training resources already in place. Those are listed here on the screen. Those training resources are located across the state and look to try to put people in place to make them better prepared and better skilled to meet expanding opportunities within the sector. We do note that there are over 750,000 households across North Carolina that pay more than $250 a month for electricity. These folks represent the highest energy burdens within North Carolina. And we do know that there are a number of barriers that this community faces in an effort to offset that with economic opportunity. And the Department of Commerce does a great job in outlining how their training resources can align with next steps. And what we will be doing with our CCAP is helping to highlight those so that folks understand where those energy and training efforts are being promoted and how we can match those with communities of interest to create those opportunities and help close that gap with people from communities of interest. Now, I'd like to bring Robin in on the presentation. She's going to walk you through all of the data that we gathered for the measures that are in our CCAP. Robin?
Thank you, David. Thank you for that great overview and some of the other information. I could talk about this CCAP for a very long time because we've been working on it since last November. However, I'm not going to take that much of your time today. I'm going to go over the highlights of what we have discovered and some of the projects that we have included in our CCAP. So the CCAP, as David mentioned, is based on information that we gathered across the state and information from policies and goals that were not only set by the state of North Carolina, but also suggested by the EPA. So our short-term target goals is to reduce our economy-wide greenhouse gas emissions to 50% below 2005 levels by 2030. The long-term target is to achieve net zero of those greenhouse gas emissions as soon as possible, but no later than 2050. Now, what we have found in our CCAP, and I'm going to say this right up top, is the state is on track to meet our 2030 goals. This outcome is driven by sector-specific strategies, but with including options for renewable energy, improving energy efficiency, expanding the use of electric vehicles, and also expanding land-based carbon sequestration. That's that sinks part. Reaching our net zero goals by 2050, however, is going to require some additional steps, and I'll explain that as we get further down the road. So in our CCAP specifically, we have 6 sectors. They are on the far left of the screen. Those were developed through looking at our greenhouse gas inventory and then further refining them. Within each sector, we have measures. Those are projects for which we have funding, for which we can measure the results, and that can be implemented or are already being implemented across the state. So for instance, in transportation, we have 4 measures laid out there. The first 3 are ones for which we have funding for, and they're funded by the VW settlement program, CFAP funding, CMAQ funding, DERA funding, and some private funding. In the electricity sector, a lot of those projects come from the State Energy Office and funding that flows through us in the State Energy Office. And that's the same with the buildings, the commercial and residential buildings. In the waste sector, we have some private funding that can support some of those projects, or we have pilot projects that we would like to do. And the natural working lands is probably one of the only sectors that EPA is funding presently. So now I'm going to dive into each of the sectors and give you some highlights from those sectors. So in the transportation sector, like I said, we have 4 measures that we found. The first 3 are the ones that are funded, and we can realize about 64,000 metric tons of carbon dioxide equivalency reduced in the short term, and in the long term, about 2,800 metric tons. So you'll see in table 2, there are projects that are considered unfunded. Those are ones for which we do not have any additional grant funding that can cover them from like VW or CMAQ. And those include like EV adoption. That's really hard to fund. Who's going to go out and pay somebody to buy a Tesla? If that happened, we would all own Teslas, right? So that's a really hard one to fund. However, in our priority climate action plan that David talked about, which preceded the CCAP, we estimated emissions that could happen from EV adoption across the board. So with some of those policies and executive orders that were put in place, there were some targets set for EV adoption as well. So we have estimated those emissions here. Some of the key takeaways for transportation is increases in low carbon and electric vehicles for those medium and heavy duty vehicles. So we're talking about school buses, one of the best ones to reduce emissions from, right? Because the kids are right there at tailpipe level. Some of the other ones are garbage trucks. They're in your neighborhood every week, once a week, sometimes more than once a week, depending on if they have to go through your neighborhood to get to another. Transit buses, emergency vehicles, and some of the others. So our costs that we're seeing so far is about $83 million to support those projects. Expanding that vehicle, the electric vehicle charging network, That is not just on the highways, but that's at gas stations and at parks and other destinations. So a lot of that is funded through VW at $14 million. The biggest improvements that we have seen, and I was quite pleased to see these, were the improvements that we have going on at our ports. That's at the Port of Wilmington and the Port of Morehead City. So they are looking at ways to reduce greenhouse gas emissions by increasing their energy efficiency. And they have received funding so far at about $17 million. So in the electricity sector, we have renewable energy resources, and we have a project that focuses on microgrids. Combined, those two will realize about 360,000 metric tons of CO2. And in the long term, we'll see about 525 metric tons, 100 metric tons of CO2 reduced. Some of our key takeaways for electricity is improvements in solar, wind, geothermal. You'll see some examples of that in the CCAP. For the microgrids, this improves the resiliency after an extreme climate event like a hurricane or wildfire. And it improves that by adding temporary microgrid solutions that can bring power, can help purify water, and can improve communications. That particular project is ongoing right now, and for a very low cost, it is improving the lives of those folks who are experience those extreme weather events. Commercial and residential buildings. So in the commercial and residential buildings arena, we have short-term greenhouse gas reductions at about 8.1 million or 8.1 metric tons, and we have about 35.5 million metric tons of greenhouse gases in the short and long term. Some of our key takeaways for this area is in the residential sector. These are improvements to weatherization, like adding insulation to your house. Also improving your heating and air conditioning units. And this is important because it lowers the energy burden, especially for folks who are low income, who live in rural areas, who might not have access to these services otherwise. We also have programs that increase energy efficiency in our state-owned buildings. And we provide energy audits and lighting replacements and things like that. And believe it or not, just replacing light bulbs with, LEDs, with even the compact fluorescent light bulbs will decrease the amount of energy you use. So in our industrial measure, the greenhouse gas reductions were estimated from our PCAP, and we did not include any ongoing projects in our CCAP because we didn't identify any. And some of those, and some of the reasons for that is it's very challenging for industry to move forward in reducing their greenhouse gas emissions because of lack of funding, or they're not seeing a return on investment in that funding. So if we don't make it profitable for them, then they won't go forward with projects like that. And they also won't go forward with projects like that if they don't have the skilled labor to actually work on some of those improvements. So if you have a brand new machine that is much more efficient than some of your older machines, but you don't have anybody to fix it, we're not going to add it to our industry. In our waste sector, we have 3 measures. that are actually included in our waste sector. However, one of those measures is related to transportation, and that's reducing trash trucks and reducing the emissions from trash trucks. So because they were included in transportation, we did not include them here so that we could avoid double counting our greenhouse gas reductions. So in the two measures that we have here, we have about 1.3 million metric tons in the short term that we can realize, and about 2 million metric tons in the long term that we can realize. Our key takeaways for waste. So reducing food waste in a landfill is huge. Okay, so we can do that by diverting that food to different areas. We can donate food within a school system. There are several school systems across the state that do this. We can also increase the amount of food that's composted. And there are places across the state that compost food waste too. And you will see that in our CCAP. The other way we can reduce emissions from landfills is actually collecting those emissions, and we can collect them through a collection system and use those gases for other things, or we can cover the landfill. The best way to do it is have both. You cover it and you collect it. I'm going to take a sip before I start coughing. Thank you. So our natural working lands, remember, these are areas that can offset the greenhouse gas emissions from all of those sources, right? So these are some of the projects that we have that can be implemented that the Department of Natural and Cultural Resources are working on. And they're working very, very hard on these. So we can realize about a 3.4 million metric ton offset in 2030, and in 2050, about a 28 million metric ton offset. Some of our takeaways from the natural working lands area is protecting those coastal and peatlands. The peatlands are things that happen before you get to the coast. Normally we call them swamps, right? So if we increase that surface area, if we increase the amount and protect those areas, we will increase the amount of CO2 that can be absorbed back into the natural environment. And we can also protect our beaches from erosion. And we know just after the last couple of hurricanes that have come through, that we're seeing increases in erosion, and all of those houses are just going out into the ocean. We want to avoid that, right? For the agricultural and forest restoration projects, these projects are being funded, and it's actually through best practices. So we go out, we talk to people, they go out and they talk to people, and they improve how people are cutting down trees in the forest, or they are improving soil management for the agriculture. And this also reduces soil erosion. So the less soil that is eroded, the more carbon sequestration happens. So David talked about an economy-wide analysis. So our CCAP also includes an economy-wide analysis. So I'm going to take a couple minutes on this particular slide to describe what's happening here. So what we did is we graphed our greenhouse gas emissions in the historical sense and in the projected sense. And that's what you see on that dark blue line that goes across the whole graph. To the left of 2020 are the historical greenhouse gas emissions, the one for which we know about. On the right, the blue line describes our business as usual projections. This is what we expect to happen if we do nothing in addition to what we're already doing. So that includes all of the emissions that are realized by transferring coal burning power plants to gas burning power plants. That's just an example, right? So we graphed those, and that's across all sectors. So that's all transportation, electricity, buildings, and everything. The bright green line are the results that I just talked about. So that shows that with the measures that we are putting forth in our CCAP, we can achieve in 2030 our 50% reduction. However, you see we fall short of achieving net zero in 2050. The pink dashed line is the key. The pink dashed line shows those projections and those projects that I alluded to that are not funded. So if you take EV adoption, if you take improvements in the industry and you add them into the mix, then we can achieve net zero by about 2045, which is before our 2050 goal. So this table, because people like tables sometimes instead of graphs, is the exact same thing as what I just talked about in our graph. So this shows our short-term and long-term emission reductions in million metric tons. So you see our base year, you see our 2020 emissions, and then you see the short-term and long-term emission reductions that we can achieve, okay? You note that there's a negative number for commercial and residential buildings in 2050. And this negative number is there because the emissions that we can realize for 2050 actually are greater than the business as usual projections that we have for that sector. So that's why we have a negative number there. So one of the things we want to highlight is while we are doing great at identifying the projects that we have, actually realizing some greenhouse gas emission reductions in the short term and in the long term, we're not done. We have to make sure that we keep going, right? So some of the key benefits for our businesses and residents in the state of North Carolina is improved air quality. Improving your air quality improves your health across the board. Reducing energy burdens, which gives more people money in their pockets. Increasing jobs opportunities. Enhancing that resiliency across the state so that when we have extreme weather events, we are not impacted as greatly as we have been in the past. And absolutely improving our natural working lands so that we can offset the greenhouse gas emissions, because they will happen and they're going to continue to happen. We just need to find ways to lessen them. So continuing our pathway to success is we need to stay on our path. We definitely need to stay on our path. We need to support our climate change actions that reduce our greenhouse gas emissions in all the sectors, all the way across the state. And so that may mean that we need to continue to find alternative solutions, adopting more resilient measures, and ensuring that all the residents across the state are included in our plans. And I think I'm going to turn it back over to David to wrap it up and tell you where we're going next.
Thank you so much, Robin. I appreciate that. So just to kind of wrap up our presentation, I'm going to give you an idea about what we're doing in terms of next steps, and then how, again, to direct all of your comment, feedback, and input so that we can incorporate your understanding and what you would like to see into our CCAP, where it should apply. So until, again, the 6th of October, we will have our draft CCAP document out on the CPRG website for public review. There's also a form available for you to complete and share with us your feedback. You're also welcome to give us feedback via our CPRG email at cprg@deq.nc.gov. After the 6th of October, we will shut down the public comment. We will take all of the input and feedback that we've received, and we'll find out how we can apply it, where it should apply, and where we should have reflect that information, if applicable, back into our document. And then we'll also make sure that we have tracked and recorded all of the public input so that we can put it back out for folks to review. And then between the 27th of October and the 21st of November, we will be taking our final CCAP document, routing it all through DEQ leadership, the Secretary's office, the Governor's office for signature and review, and then we'll be submitting it to the EPA on the 26th of November. So again, this is just kind of a screen capture of what you should see on our CPRG website to the left. Again, there's a link to the form. There's the website address. There's also a big QR code that if you want to take a snapshot of that right now, you can go ahead and use that QR code and it will take you directly to that page and to the form. Again, the website is out there. The presentation will be recorded and will also be out there as well as the slides from this presentation. Lastly is our contact information. If you need anything from either Robin or myself, feel free to reach out. Our telephone number and our email is there as well. And with that, I think we have concluded our information session for the day. We hope that the information we presented to you was helpful, valuable. Again, we think that this information gives you some context and valuable history that you can use when evaluating our document. And we look forward to hearing from each and every one of you with the input and the feedback that you have for us. So thank you so much and have a great day.